Another thing real quick I'd like to do is thank the folks that put on this convention, because it takes a lot of hard work to do this. First, Monica Rollins, Gino Napoli, wherever Gino is, and of course my good buddy Craig Wool here, who not only did this, and trust me, it's a lot of work, but for everything he's done over the years, because this provides a way for all of us to get together. And before I was up here talking to you folks, I was sitting there front row at these type of things, and now that I'm involved in that, I really see the value of having these things. And Craig has been doing this forever. I call him the guru of Bigfoot. He knows everything. Big round of applause for Craig Wool here.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for coming out. Everybody took time out of their day, took money out of their wallet to come in, and I appreciate that. We just want to put on a good event. Next year, October 15th, 2016, mark your calendars. We'll be here third weekend, 15th anniversary event. First one was 4 days after 9/11. First one I did here in 2001 was 4 days after 9/11, and I was freaked out.
I bet.
I had speakers that couldn't fly in because there weren't any planes flying, and we still had over 100 people that showed up that day. And it's grown every year since. So I just want to thank everybody for coming out.
Okay, without further ado, if you have questions for our lovely panel of researchers up here.
Well, one man's a pig.
Help us out there, man.
4 out of 5.
This lovely panel of wild ruffians who research monsters, feel free to ask.
Like a band. Yeah. We could be a band.
Yes, we all play. Yes, sir.
Several years ago, they had a fingerprint expert talking about Sasquatch fingerprints. And the damage on the car you were talking about with the lizard man and the sheriff being so involved, did he ever look for fingerprints or anything like that?
Yeah, they basically did forensics, and of course in 1988, it wasn't what they had available to them when some subsequent incidents happened in the late 2000s. But yes, in the later cases, they actually did DNA on the saliva left on the vehicle. In one case, it turned up to be canine, which was very surprising. Early on, they did. There was obviously prints of animal prints and things like that, and they photographed those, and they took that as evidence. And so, yeah, they did a fairly thorough investigation of those to the best of their abilities, and they asked...
No anomalous fingerprints?
No, there was no strange, unknown fingerprints. A lot of it was a mess, but they did their best to sort it out. All right, let's roll with question number 2. Yes?
Redfern was talking about the Chupacabras.
Yeah.
And I have a question. Did they ever find any prints? Because it looked like the picture you were showing was dirt. Did they have any prints?
Well, from Texas, obviously, we've got a lot of prints because, we know that they're coyotes, and the prints from those are pretty much identical, if not identical, with regular coyotes. Now, there have been some reports of differences in limb length, which is sort of controversial as well. There have been a few tracks from Puerto Rico, but the problem is that for the most part, with the original Puerto Rican attacks, the ranchers and farmers, being fairly poor for a lot of the people, they're just not really interested in taking prints. They're more interested in keeping food on the table for their families. So, in other words, from Puerto Rico, there isn't much evidence, physical evidence that's been collected because nobody's really collecting it. That's the big problem that we face, and unless somebody literally goes out into the field to specifically do research. So unfortunately, there's not much in the way of prints in the same way there actually is with Bigfoot. It's complete opposite situations.
Thank you.
All right. Have y'all tried to figure out how many calories Bigfoot actually needs to eat every day in order for it to survive? I know they've done that with the T-Rex, which they're trying to reclassify. Instead of a hunter, it's more of a scavenger instead.
So the question is, does anybody know how many calories or how much Bigfoot would need to eat to survive?
Looking for a needle in a haystack there. Because first of all, we haven't got a definitive understanding of what its diet is. How much time is actually spent foraging, how much time is actually spent at rest. It's a dynamic that is too fluid at this particular time. But if you said, for instance, we were feeding a professional basketball player, say for comparative height purposes, not necessarily for build purposes, or a massive linebacker in the NFL, those guys are eating 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day. Now Sasquatches are bulkier and bigger. If you extrapolate, say, like 1.5 by 1.5, you get 9,000 calories a day, which means that guy's pretty much foraging all day long. But I can't see it happening. There seem to be periods where it is at rest and it doesn't locomote very much. So, like everything else about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, even its calorie requirements remain a mystery to us today. But one day when you do find a dead one, you'll be able to extract the stomach contents, weigh the creature, and understand it better. But until then, I'd say realistically 8,000 to 9,000 calories a day.
That's a lot of food, man. Bigfoot protein powders.
Let's trademark that.
Okay, let's roll. Who's got it on? Yes,
There's
ma'am.
been a lot of speculation about why we don't find Bigfoot bones, and you guys presented some evidence. But I did, a while ago, read something that maybe they bury them. And I was noting, I think it was Ken who had the little teepee thing. Do you think there's any possibility that the teepee thing relates to where they bury the bones? Has anybody looked at that?
That's an interesting question, and actually rock piles and stone piles are another thing that we sometimes find, assume might be related to Bigfoot. So other people have asked me that too, could that be some kind of marker? I mean, pretty much all the questions about Bigfoot, like John said, it's just wild speculation. I do think that there is the potential there that they might bury their own dead. If you look at other human-like beings, Neanderthals, they discovered a new one last month, Homo naledi in Africa, and even though it's an assumption, there was this deep cavernous region where they found all these bodies and bones as if they had all been kind of played there with a purpose. But that wouldn't explain every single specimen, because you're going to have that odd incident where a creature dies off, in some remote area, and obviously it doesn't have its buddies around. So, but that's been something that's been discussed for years. That perhaps they do somehow hide their bones. I don't know if anyone has ever found an alleged burial site. Has anyone heard of that? Of a presumed burial site or a burial? So, yeah.
Yeah, I just kind of reiterate what I said about these animals being primates and being potentially, because wild primates are long-lived animals. If you have a small population and you have a long-lived animal, the chances of finding the remains before something else eats it. And most people, this hasn't been a search that's been going on for 50, 60 years maybe. And so the chances, and most people aren't weird enough to find some stinking thing out in the woods when they're going hiking with their girlfriend and make out and go, let's go look at the carcass. So I think just the fact of a long-lived animal with a small population would make finding any kind of remains challenging. Not that it won't ever happen, it probably will someday. Or maybe it has and people didn't know what they had in the skeletal remains. So, like everything, it's a mystery.
Dude in the awesome Boggy Creek show over here.
Yeah, based on a show of hands, since they're so elusive and hard to find bones and remains, how many of you guys on the panel are pro-kill to prove a specimen?
That we can do up here is pro-kill in order to prove this.
Nobody.
I'll take the mic. Okay, John threatened to arrest me about 10 years ago or something. Here's where I'm at. I used to hunt to kill, because the only way it'll ever happen, they'll prove it is a body. Whether it's a roadkill or it's a remain or someone brings one, and there's no question a film isn't going to make it. Unless you have one like showing a herd of buffalo or something in front of it. That probably would say that's CGI. So here's where I'm at with it. I no longer hunt to kill. It's not worth it. If you've seen the Cecil the Lion thing, there's no way I wouldn't do that to my family. And that's where I'm at with it. Would I be glad if someone killed one? I wouldn't have been glad if I killed one. My purposes were a little different. I wasn't trying to get rich. It was a wildlife identification conservation thing. But it's still going to require volume. That's what I think. As far as how they do it, I don't think too many people that are pro-kill don't have too much success. So I wouldn't expect somebody to whack one anytime soon.
Good answer. Jeff.
So, you guys keep talking about how there's never been any evidence that's actually been found in terms of a body, but this is a question for Chester. So Smokey wrote about a body that he's seen. I've seen and examined it in person. I know you've seen it also in person. What are your thoughts on it?
It's a tiger.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely a tiger.
Siberian tiger.
It's probably a Siberian because of the length and body size. Wow. We were just talking about this, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to the sheriff down there in Harrison County that was there and found that. And it's all the details are in my book. And but yeah, I've seen the skeleton. It's truly a mind-blowing looking thing. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. But truly, I traced the trail back to the sheriff who investigated it, game warden, the veterinarian guy, the taxidermist that had dumped the body there. So, I mean, while it's a good chapter of the Fouke monster history and a cool Bigfoot thing, there is an explanation for it.
I guess I need to read your book, see?
He hasn't read.
Actually, I got a two-part. Have any, particularly you, Chester, have you seen or heard anything about the Arizona State study about not requiring a specimen? In other words, basing the whole premise on a preponderance of evidence.
On Sasquatch in particular?
Well, extinct species.
Well, they have recognized birds and things from photographs because we know birds exist and certain subspecies of birds are common and others, that kind of thing. And I'm not familiar with this particular study, but to make the leap from a bird of a different variety to an animal that's mythic proportions, it's a primate that's possibly humanoid, whatever we're dealing with, I think it's a whole different ball of wax. I don't see it happening because of so many political layers you have to go through. I could be wrong. What do you gentlemen think?
I mean, I think the problem here is the longer we go, Bigfoot in pop culture has developed so much that, it's this point, that's one reason a film is not going to do it. Everybody is tired of seeing all that stuff, and we may look at it differently than the average person, but science is up against something like Bigfoot. You're going to really require something really solid, and so I don't think that's going to work.
It's kind of what they're running into.
I just wanted to add, this is just my personal opinion here, is obviously I have the great benefit of talking to a lot of researchers around the country. I really would like to see more researchers abandon photographic and audio and very subjective evidence and really focus on physical evidence. I have people that get in touch with me and say they have a habituation of, a family of Sasquatches on their property, but they don't put any effort into finding droppings. If you've got a family of large primates on your property, they're pooping. And that would be something, or a bone, hair, something. But so many researchers are still focused on the photographic and the audio recording aspect.
Yeah, the other part is regarding the coyotes and wolves. We all seem to think that coyotes and Bigfoot run together, one begets the other. Do you think wolves are doing the same thing?
I've had people suggest that Bigfoot runs around and follows coyotes and those kind of things. I have no way to corroborate that. I know that coyotes are indigenous to all the states, provinces of Canada. They're all together. They're very prolific. So encountering Bigfoot creatures and coyotes in the same jurisdiction is perfectly logical. And I've had people who've got evidence of Bigfoot creatures preying potentially on coyotes. But I don't know. I don't have any evidence of that. And I did hear an interesting story of some researchers in North Louisiana who heard what would be like a pretty pitiful wolf howl imitation in coyotes sound. And then the wolf howl imitation got closer, the coyotes got closer, and then it was right close to their camp, and then they hear a thwack and so take that for what it's worth. But had a guy argue with me one time that Bigfoot used coyotes to hunt, that the coyotes were trained and they would go out. So I don't know. You heard that one too?
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Real quick, thank you guys. You guys are all so interesting to listen to. First time to come to a conference, and I just wanted to say thank you for being so accommodating after we see you on TV and watch you on shows and that. It's really been a pleasure to see you guys. You guys are really great. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much. It's a two-way road. I mean, if you guys weren't here, we wouldn't, nobody was interested in this, so it takes everybody. We appreciate you as well. Yes, sir.
Just, do you think that, what would it take, or will it ever happen for my boss, that's part of wildlife, to take the red wolf off of crypto?
What would it take? He's asking, I guess, what would it take to take the red wolf, Canis rufus, off of, to admit that they're here?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going to happen, I don't think. And the reason is, what the red wolf is in the mainstream scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, is now controversial. I mean, there is genetic evidence that suggests that everyone in the captive breeding program has coyote blood in it, and you know that they're this, and some even suggest that they're simply a fertile hybrid from back long ago of gray wolves, and there's a lot of controversy. So I think what's happened with the red wolf, it's almost like Chupacabra in a way. Everything has become the Chupacabra. Well, what the red wolf is, science has got 50 different answers now what a red wolf is. So to kind of answer your question a long way, I don't think that'll ever happen. My thing is this, is that these animals certainly have a different behavior pattern, a little bit of slightly different ecological needs, and we just want to raise awareness to it and let you know you're not crazy, that you know, the 85-pound black canid at your back door was not a coyote. Right. You know, but I don't think we'll ever see any kind of formal, that was really good English, wasn't it? Formal recognition, because now there's so much mainstream controversy over what the species is. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that I've kind of read extensively on the footprint evidence and the dermal ridges and things like that, of that nature, kind of like lending credence to more of the footprint evidence. But I think one of the big issues with trying to find biological evidence would be the expense and the enormity of testing things like hair samples, saliva samples, scat samples. If you're just looking for random hair in a forested area, then the amount of black bear, deer, things like that are going to be, you know, tremendous. And if people are sending in large amounts of these things to be tested at an expense, most universities and legitimate scientific institutions are not going to want to take the time to try to break down all of those samples, put them through the, you know, spectral analysis that it takes to determine a hair sample. What do you think, guys? No, I was just, I mean, do you think it's actually plausible to be able to test, you know, the amount of biological evidence available?
First and foremost, right, no university is going to take anything from you or any testing lab unless you've done your due diligence yourself first, which is to run comparisons at relatively low cost. For instance, looking at hairs under microscopes to see where the medulla is compared to other known things. You can do a lot of this stuff basically before it even goes to the lab. So that's cost effective, number one. Secondly, there are labs like Trent University in Ontario, Canada, who've tested stuff quite happily and willingly because it's not as expensive as it used to be. You used to send a DNA sample in some of the universities in Canada and America. It cost you 30 grand to get it done. It's much cheaper than somebody here in Texas is charging, but suffice it to say, it's not as expensive as it would be. What we have to do from a scientific perspective is to be more circumspect about anything that we offer. Some hairs are readily identifiable as being known species just by looking at it. I know loads of guys in BC who can look at a bear hair and tell you it's a bear hair. Other guys can tell you it's a wood bison hair, that kind of jazz. It's simple. We keep the process cost effective by doing our due diligence first. But there is a greater and greater acceptance of things. I mean, one of the things that just blows my mind, even though it's a kind of controversial finding, was Brian Sykes with the Yeti stuff. The fact that the guy who was in charge of the Oxford University Molecular Biology Lab was willing to look at all this stuff and run it through. Similarly, give it credit, Melba Ketchum did some interesting stuff, but people were willing to do this. So it's no longer the scary boogeyman for most of us. Some of us actually have protocols with universities where they will do it, but they require a huge amount of preparatory work on our behalf first before they'll do anything else. I hope that answers your question.
Concerning the Texas Chupacabra, the hairless condition, being whether mange or naturally hairless, it seems to me that most practicing veterinarians would be able to look at the animals that have been killed or found and be able to determine that fairly easily. I guess what I'm asking, how much forensic work has been done on the corpses that have been found or killed?
Well, Ken can probably answer better in terms of the actual forensics. I know Ken's actually taken part in a couple of things like that, haven't you? The study of forensic analysis.
Well, in terms of sarcoptic mange, the flesh has to be fairly fresh, and because the mites excavate off of the body. But I do know that a live quote-unquote chupacabra was captured in Lake Jackson, Texas, about 4 years ago, and I personally interviewed the wildlife biologist who examined it while it was alive and said she saw the mange mites on the skin, and then it died shortly thereafter. So that, to me, that was pretty convincing.
Yeah, the reason there's a controversy is because a lot of the ones that have been found dead and that have been filmed I won't say it's not mange, but it's not typical of what you're seeing very often in mange, which is where the fur is very patchy. You've got a patch of fur, then you've got skin and patches, and the animals scratch and irritate themselves, scratch deeply, and causes infection, they get sick. In a lot of these so-called Texas Chupacabra, we're not seeing that. We're seeing animals that are uniformly, pretty much hairless, and without the scratching, without the irritation and the infection. So the big question is it mange, or is it sort of a far more aggressive type of mange? And if it's a far more aggressive type, how does that tie in, with the bigger picture of what this creature is or isn't? And maybe Chester knows some more about the whole mange angle as well.
I don't know much about the forensics part of it. That's interesting about Lake Jackson. I've had a lot of reports in that kind of area of these things. But what I have heard a lot is from hunting ranches who are doing predator control and wildlife in the south central part of the state. There's a lot of wool production and stuff like that, where they have professional hunters and trappers that go in there. And everyone I've talked to in the last few years has seen and or killed some of these animals with the coyote control programs. So it seems pretty legit that they just consider them coyotes and mange. And they look at them and say it's a coyote, they act like a coyote. But it's interesting because I've been a wildlife reporter in Texas for 23 years now, started when I was 19. And until 6 or 7 years ago, I had never heard of an instance of this pop up in the hunting community, not one item of it, not one picture sent to our magazine. So there's something that's different seems to be happening at a different, or maybe at a different pace than ever before. And I guess that's maybe one of the questions to ask, because we've never seen it, never getting photos sent to our magazine of dead ones, but we never had that happen before. So something different is definitely happening out there, or maybe at an accelerated rate that we're seeing now because more people have game cameras, more people have cell phone cameras and that kind of thing.
All right, who's next? Yeah.
I was in Vivian, Louisiana, that's about 30 or 35 miles from here. My daddy is Ronnie Thompson, and he was running out of gas. He looked at my mother and said, "Rita, I am running out of gas and we're lost. So we have to pull up to this house and ask for directions." What we saw, it shocked us. I remember this like it was yesterday. And we verified it with our family. I asked my brothers and sisters and mother, and it did happen. What we saw was a little boy that was chained to a tree. And he was
kind of like a strawberry red hair, and he was dark complected. And what bothered us most when we saw this, and it shocked us, and we started crying. Because we thought, you know, bad children get chained to a tree. Back in the olden days, in Vivian, in Louisiana, it's well documented that if they didn't know what to do with the retarded children or handicapped children, they tied them to a tree. But what if this boy got loose? And that's what it's called, you know, I'm just starting like from the beginning, what I experienced. But I seen a woman, the mother, came out of the house. She was wearing a white dress. It was so filthy. She didn't have no bra on, I promise you, it was down in here. And she slung, it was not a bucket, it was like a dish pan, a white dish pan. She slung the food out to the boy. And he was grabbing it like a pig. We swear we saw this, and it did exist 35 miles from here. I'm from Shreveport, Louisiana. My daddy is Charlie Thompson, Thompson Sound. And we can verify this easily. But
Yeah, I
what
mean,
if this boy got loose and grew up in the woods, and his little sister, if they had a sibling, if they grew up in the woods, because they've been spotted so many times around this area.
Sure, I mean, I think the point of that story, which is a crazy story, I mean, but reality, no doubt. I mean, not crazy and crazy, just a mind-blowing experience when you pull up as a kid and you see that of course these things went on. That's how they dealt with things back then. I think this raises a question is, could feral humans account for sightings of Bigfoot? I think is essentially what we're saying here, that certainly there was instances like that, and somebody, you know, ran loose in the woods. And the answer to that is that I think that could account for some, and I've investigated, researched into, you know, feral humans or wild men, wild women, which no doubt occasionally were solved and turned out to be feral people living in the woods. And, you know, it kind of bleeds over into the Bigfoot research when you start looking at historical accounts, because, you know, those are called wild men, and you find those stories and you run them down. But I don't think that could account for all Bigfoot. You know, I mean, if they bred, I mean, there's just too many Bigfoot sightings in too many states and too many places for it to all, you know, have originated from, certainly from one instance or even many instances of feral humans. And of course, the descriptions of Bigfoot in most cases don't match that of even someone who had lived in the woods for years and years. But it's an important kind of part of historical Bigfoot research to consider wild men stories, feral humans, and all that stuff, which plays into that. So, any more questions? Amazing story. I gotta work that in. Chilling, that's as Chester just said. Yeah. Anything else? Maybe. Yes, ma'am.
The young man who had his car attacked by the lizard man, it listed an early death. I mean, it looked like he died at a young age. Is there any research about how he died?
Yeah, she's asking. I talked about one of it's the major witness in the lizard man case, Christopher Davis, who saw that reported something in 1988. Yes, there's kind of a sad, really gone off the rails here. There's really kind of a sad footnote to his tale that in, I believe, I want to say 2003 or so, Christopher Davis was shot and killed, murdered in his own house. He later in life, now this was a promising young man who had this, you know, bizarre experience with something that he reported, and later on, I think it affected him throughout life. He was known in that town as the kid who saw the lizard man, and he ended up moving away, but bottom line is he got into some bad things and knew some bad people, and he was murdered. They just walked into his house with his family there and just shot him in the kitchen. So he did die, and that was, if you read my book, there's actually several of the other witnesses that strange things occurred. I call it the curse of the lizard man. So, yeah, kind of a bizarre thing, but we probably don't have too much more time, but let's does anybody have an uplifting question?
going
That was a
down.
great question, and she had a great story, but hey, you know what I'm saying?
I realize that we don't want to kill Bigfoot, but what about if you went out with a team to tranquilize Bigfoot? How impossible is that?
Who wants to take the trank question?
I'm avowedly no-kill, so I'll take that one. There's no reason that that's not a viable proposition, because in the end, it survived. Now, the question here, though, is what do you tranquilize it with? It's extremely difficult to gauge. Do we use the same thing we use on bears, cougars, elephants, rhinoceroses? What do we use? You could cause accidental death by going out there and tranquilizing it, so it's a heck of a risk. It's absolutely massive. Now, you could do some precautionary things like what works on human beings and what dosage do you use? If you stuck to that, you're pretty much in safe territory. From a moral point of view, it's perfectly fine to do that, even from those of us who are avowedly no-kill, because in the end, the species is allowed to continue, and this guy has a chance of procreating, enjoying its life, and what have you. So, from that point of view, even for us guys who are no-kill, that's okay. It's not a problem.
I was wondering if anyone had ever looked into seeing if there are any indications where Sasquatches are found or sighted a lot, if there are any tools that are obviously old, so they're not weathered or anything like that, since with primitive hominids you see tools as indications of culture and their brain size, so that gives us an indication about Sasquatches.
Okay, this is a tricky question.
It's got my pay grade.
Good. Tool making in Sasquatch has never been observed, let's put it that way. But there have been interesting finds in areas where Sasquatches occur, and you wonder, for instance, my host Shelley Covington has this tool that was obviously freshly used by something in an area where Sasquatch inhabit. We can speculate till the cows come home today as to whether a Sasquatch used that tool. But there is that interesting anomaly and sort of cross-reference there between Sasquatch location areas and the finding of these strange tools and what have you. But until somebody actually sees one using one, which has never happened, we have to leave that in the realm of speculation.
We've got one. This is uplifting.
This is uplifting. I just posted this on my Facebook. I came across an account of the Yeren, which is a Chinese Sasquatch, basically. And some gentlemen in China back in the 1970s claimed that they were sitting around a fire one night and a Yeren came in and actually joined them and began to put firewood into the fire. And they were so freaked out by this experience that they actually ignored it and pretended like it wasn't there because they didn't know what else to do. So maybe Bigfoot knows how to add firewood to a fire.
You never know how you're going to react to these situations, you know, a sighting where it joins the campfire, I don't know.
I was just wondering if any of y'all five have actually had experience with a Bigfoot.
I've never actually had a verified sighting that I could say was a Bigfoot.
No, I'm kind of like with Lyle, but I guess the closest is sort of finding these fairly controversial tree structures in the woods, you know, the tree formations. And, you know, a lot of debate as to whether they're the real thing or whether they're just, you know, random acts of nature or whatever. I think some of them aren't. Now, it doesn't obviously tell us if there is a direct connection, but for me, you know, when you're in an area where Bigfoot's been seen and you come across these tree structures, even if you don't actually see a creature, it does kind of give you an eerie feeling that maybe, you know, 40 feet away in the thick trees, something is there. And I think, you know, and it does sort of make their hairs on your arms stand up. Just the idea that you could be in the heart of their territory. So, you know, imagine you kind of feel like that just looking at a tree structure, how you might feel if you're confronted with something that's sort of 7 or 8 feet tall, you know, it's sort of a life-changing event, I guess.
Okay. One more question. Anybody have one more?
One more final amazing question.
I just have a statement. We have an habituation site, and my kids don't like me to say steal, but they borrow our stuff, our tools, all the time. And I did receive an orange that was cut in half and quartered as if to just rip apart meat, and that, I think they used a very sharp blade. It was really very accurate.
Possible tool use on her property.
Okay,
Yeah,
one
man,
more.
one
Last
more.
one, last one.
Yes, like creek stories, like creek travel stories, they state that the folks, he jumped, they say when he walks by a house, he would take a tree or a limb and whip the porch or whip the house. So that's part of the story that when they were, like a hairy creature, tall creature. So when you were saying something about them using some type of, say someone actually witnessed one of these creatures using a wood or some type of tree limb. So that was part of some of the stories I used to hear from my grandma. They were born back in the 1920s. Their dad was born back in the 1800s. So this was a story that they would say this creature would come by. So I just throwing it out there about them saying that they used some type of branch or some type of tool.
Okay, cool. Hey, anybody have a red, hold your arm up, a red thing? Leave it on, because they won't feed you if you don't have it. That's how they are. Anyway, how about a big hand for John Kirk III, Ken Gerhard, Lyle Blackburn, just the most